This is Blackstone Joe, and you're listening to Slick Talk.
If I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
There's the stink of oil about him.
Welcome into episode 98. Again, I'm Blackstone Joe, but today I'm not riding alone. I'm joined by Samir. We have another Meet the Analyst episode, and I couldn't have been more excited to be joined by Samir on this show. He's been an analyst in the building for a long time, so he's helped many, but maybe only a few of you know him by name, and even fewer know any of the fun facts about him, including myself. I learned a lot during this segment just by talking about his history, working on cars, his time in the Marines, his journey to Blackstone. There's a whole lot to unpack in this episode. So without further ado, here's Samir and myself on episode 98. We're going to take what I always feel like is an irresponsible break away from the data to try and record an episode.
Yeah, no doubt.
I feel bad every time because, you know, this has to happen sometime, right? Like I have to take a step away and record, but I know in the back of my head, all I see is the P&P sheets with endless amounts of reports at me right now. I feel like a jerk, but like, you know, people like the podcast too, so it matters.
Yeah, it's still work.
Yeah. So do you want to get the Brett questions out of the way first?
Sure. Which ones are those?
I don't know how much time you've spent around Brett, but she has her own style, so don't be too taken aback. But she wants to know, first off, what is your favorite section of the alphabet?
Wow. I've never put thought into that before.
You see, all right, I had multiple answers. I'll give you some time by saying mine. At first, I went with what was apparently a square answer, which is LMNOP, because it feels like the audible equivalent of rolling down a hill.
Ah.
But she called that out and said that's just regular. And I said, okay, JK, because it feels like you're saying you were just kidding about the preceding order and that the rest of the alphabet is a joke.
That's interesting to think about. I would probably go at the end just because it's the end and it's over with.
She said the end too because it felt like all the outcast letters.
Ah, yeah, the ones
I don't know.
Rarely use.
But that's just Brett's favorite way to get the ball rolling, I guess. But another thing she had in mind, which I was going to ask you too, just probably in a different way, is like, what is your favorite thing about Blackstone or something that has kept you here over the years?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the one I'd probably gravitate to the most is Kristen and Ryan. They take care of us pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
But if it was besides that stuff, I'd probably say, just helping the customers, because it's kind of I like being a mechanic. So this is a kind of a way for me to still be a mechanic without actually getting dirty and still helping customers at the end of the day. So
when did that aspect of, your interests start? Like, when did you first know that you liked working on stuff, and what was there a moment, a job, like a car you owned that really kickstarted that passion?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that question because I was just thinking about this the other day. I don't know if you noticed, but Netflix just put Fast and Furious on their streaming. So it all started with the first Fast and Furious, of course. That's
naturally
where my love for automotive came into play, and that's where everything went downhill pretty much. I went and saw that movie and I wanted to have a car just like them, so, and I think I was around 15, 16 at the time, still pretty young. And so obviously first car was not going to be a Supra. That was just not going to happen, but it ended up being a Celica, and, went down the tuner route, got my head into the whole tuner realm. And I went to school for automotive technology and then became a technician. And so that's how that ball got started. And it hasn't stopped ever since. I still love cars, still love working on them. Everything about them, it intrigues me.
I never knew about the automotive technician side. So did any of that carry over to the Marine Corps?
Yeah, absolutely. I started out as an automotive technician, did that for, I want to say 3 or 4 years. between 15 and 20, somewhere around there, my age. And then at 20, I lost my job as a technician, and I think that was right when the job market was really down. It was
Uh-huh.
hard to find another job, so that's how I went back to my first idea, the Marine Corps, and
Oh, really?
then I went back and I decided to go that route. I was in kind of some debt at that time, and they told me that when I go to boot camp, they would defer all my payments. So I was
Really?
like, you got me all signed up because the last thing I wanted was more interest and more fees and stuff stacking up. So I ended up joining, and it worked out being a technician there because I went in as an open contract actually. So they
Oh,
could have given me
okay.
any job under the umbrella. So I ended up with water purification, and I didn't think my mechanical skills would really translate there, but surprisingly enough, the water guys work with electricians and they work with HVAC guys, so all utilities pretty much. So mechanically inclined, it came in handy with generators, AC equipment, all that kind of stuff. So it really came in handy. And a lot of the tools that we would use, most of the Marines, I mean, they're new, just like me at the time. So they didn't know much about the tools or, what they needed to have or how to use them even.
Uh-huh.
So they train you and stuff, but they only teach you so much. So having somebody there that knew a little bit about the tools and what the difference between a 5/8 and I don't know, 14 millimeter, for example, just these kinds of things, it came in handy. They put me in the tool room right off the bat. So I was
So
kind
were
of immersed in that world.
were you doing everything from like full teardowns or like just like minor repairs to keep things going? Like what was the daily sort of routine like?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually we wouldn't do any kind of full teardowns or anything. In training, we did just so you kind of understood what was going on inside the various pumps and generators and things. But after that, in the real world, we would do just minimal maintenance and minimal repairs. Anything that was beyond our scope would get sent out to another shop. They had other shops that were different echelons. They would do the rebuilds and things other places. So we would just do the basic maintenance, replacing starters, replacing pumps and things like that.
So what was the journey like from the Marines to Blackstone? Like were you looking for continued automotive work and just happened to stumble upon oil analysis or how'd that go?
Yeah, it started out with me looking for more mechanical work. I went into working at Midas for a couple of years after the Marine Corps, and that was in California.
Oh, okay.
I didn't like that so much after being in the Marine Corps because it went from, I was somewhat in charge towards the end of my run in the Marines to now I'm
Uh-huh.
back to being a peon and working for somebody else.
Yeah.
And there's always some politics involved in shop life, so it didn't work out for me, and I moved back to Fort Wayne, and that's when I started looking for jobs, and I saw Blackstone. It was on the help wanted list, and I was like, huh, oil analysis. I was like, I have no idea if I would even like it or what they do really. But I was like, they were looking for somebody that was somewhat automotively inclined.
Yeah.
So I applied for the job, and once I learned what it was, I was like, wow, this could be really good.
Uh-huh.
And I was just finishing up my IT degree at that time, and I wasn't set on IT, So I thought maybe this might be a good mix of the two, a desk job and still working with mechanical stuff.
Yeah, and you're perhaps as qualified as possible to walk in the
Yeah,
door and
I
talk
thought
about
so.
things. Yeah.
I was hoping I was. I had no idea like what Kristen and Ryan were looking for at that time, or even Jim. He was around then too. So they all three interviewed me, and I wasn't sure I was going to get the job. I thought I came in a suit, to be honest with you. I
Me
came in a
too.
suit because I
Yep.
thought I was supposed to be like, if I'm getting an office job, I better be well dressed.
Yeah. Same. Yeah. I walked in just to the nines and I had no idea, what the vibe was like, but I'm also curious. I mean, so what year was that when you started?
Oh, that was 2012.
So what was the difference if you can kind of, put a finger on it, the operation, the daily, I don't know, just the look of things compared to now? Has it changed noticeably to you from when you walked in the door?
Oh yeah. Well, maybe not so much at first glance, but when you start looking through the campus we have now,
Yeah.
it's certainly changed. It went from just the one building to now we have multiple buildings and multiple areas of the lab. I mean, I was just there a few weeks ago and I probably didn't even get to see the whole thing.
Hmm.
So it's changed a lot in that regard. But as far as like the company goes, the people, we're all very much still the same. We all tend to work together well, and like I said, Ryan and Kristen take good care of us, and everybody seems to get along well. I think it's the first job I've had where we don't really have any workplace drama, and
Yeah.
it's really nice.
We have too many reports to write, honestly,
Yeah,
to
there's so
really
much to do.
worry about much else. I mean, I remember after being here for just a few months, generally you sit down with Kristen and Ryan after a few months just to kind of touch base and see where you're at. And I said it then, and it's still true now. It's got to be the quickest 9 to 5 I've ever experienced. It flies
The
by
time just flies by.
due to how much we have. But
Yeah.
I was looking around through your file before we sat down, and there's one vehicle in there I didn't recognize, and that was the '98 Silvia. So
Yes.
what can you tell me about the '98 Silvia? Because I'm familiar with, I think, most other things you sampled. What's the story with that one? When did you get it? And just kind of when did the journey start with that one?
Yeah, that's probably one of my prized possessions as far as vehicles go. I bought that car when I was still in high school, I think. I was just about to graduate, so 2004-ish, and I worked at Preferred Auto, and it was a car that came in on a trade-in. I came to work Monday morning as a technician, and I drive through the bullpen. That's where we parked our cars, and I happened to see this car as a green one. It's just sitting back there, and it looked unusual to me. I wasn't really even sure what I was looking at that time because the 240 SX, it just wasn't that common of a car, at least not stateside. In Japan, they had them everywhere, but here, I mean, and then maybe they were. I just didn't notice them. Maybe my eye just wasn't tuned for it. But when I saw it, I knew it was something I had to look into because I always, like I said, I was so hard set on that Fast and Furious life that when
Yeah.
I saw a car that had potential, I was like, I got to see if I can maybe afford this or what. So I went and talked to the salesman, and they had it there, and they said they'd sell it to me. So it was an automatic transmission at that time, and I wasn't so crazy about that. I was really looking for something with a manual, something that really had that upgrade potential, and it didn't have that. So I was kind of swaying back and forth. Do I want to buy it? Do I not? And so finally, I decided, if I'm going to do an engine swap, if I'm going to really put the money into this car, I'm going to change the transmission anyway. So I went ahead and pulled the trigger, and only dreamt about what was to come next.
Yeah.
It was several years before I even got that car under the knife and actually did any real work to it to make it produce some real power.
Oh,
It was
wow.
after the Marine Corps, in fact. So it sat around for quite a bit of time. I drove it back and forth to California on the original engine and transmission, and it was a great car, drove perfectly fine. And then after my deployment to Iraq, I came back with a good chunk of change, and I was like, I'm dropping it all on this car.
Yeah.
And that's when I swapped in the turbo engine, the SR20 DET, and converted it to a 5-speed. And did some other goodies too, some front mount intercooler, a couple other modifications, get a little bit
So
more power out of it.
your sampling experience then obviously would have started after all of the mods, right? So
Yeah.
what surprised you, if anything, about how it looked in analysis compared to maybe what you might have expected?
I think if I remember correctly, it had some high chrome and iron,
Uh-huh.
and I wasn't so surprised by that, to be honest with you, only because I drove it pretty hard. So the iron was no surprise, but I think chrome caught me off guard. I think if I remember, it was around 14 parts per million, and
Yeah.
I think average is only like 1 or 2. Shouldn't be very much. And I didn't think it showed a ring problem at the time because I was still new, and I don't even know if it does show a ring problem or not, but I'm almost certain there's something going on just because it has a mild tick to it, not really a knock, but a little bit of engine noise, and something I've never really even had time to investigate, but it's definitely there. And I think the analysis kind of supports that idea that there's something to look into. So one of these days when I get the time, I'll start tearing into that thing.
Do you ever take it to the track, or like when you do get the opportunity to drive it, what do you like to do with it?
Well, now it mostly sits at my mom's house in the garage, so it's been several years since it's been sitting. I'm in Montana now, and it's in Indiana, so
Yeah.
I don't really get the chance to drive it much or do anything with it really. While I was back this last time I tried to fire it up, but the battery was dead, so it
Uh-huh.
needs some TLC, it needs some love and some time. But when I did drive it, I would take it to the occasional track day, some SCCA events. They had in San Diego, they used to do some 8th mile drag racing.
Hmm.
I went and did some racing there. It was surprisingly enough, it kept up with some Corvettes in the 8th mile. It was kind of
Oh,
fun.
wow. Yeah.
They always looked at me funny because they're like, it's half the engine, but still keeping up. I'm sure in the 1/4 mile though, they'd probably take me with the top end. So,
Yeah, sure. So
but it was a lot of fun.
How has oil analysis informed your maintenance over the years, do you think, when it comes to taking care of that car or others?
Yeah. Um, Honestly, I think it's actually made me a little bit more relaxed as far as
Mhm.
maintenance goes. Instead of being so hardcore about 3,000 or 5,000 miles or even annually, I probably don't pay as much attention to my maintenance as I should now. Only
Yeah.
because I know most of the cars and trucks I have, they're capable of 10,000 plus mile oil change intervals, especially based on the data. If I were just to do it that every 10,000, it'd probably be annually, just like they suggest. But I usually could stretch it out a little bit longer, maybe a year and a half at most. And
Mhm.
so I just don't have to worry about it so much. But it's a double-edged sword because I forget about it at times too, because I don't want to do it so often.
Yeah. Yeah, not having to worry about calendar time is definitely a big thing for me, and then also, it always surprises people to know that we don't really carry or we don't worry too much about the brand or the blend so much.
Yeah, that's a big one too. I used to use Mobile One, or I used to spend the money on some of these higher dollar oils. Now it's all Super Tech, only because it's easy to find and Walmart tends to be the cheapest.
Yeah.
So that's what I usually go with. I try to go the synthetic route though, just for that peace of mind. It doesn't really,
Mhm.
I don't think it really changes the numbers as far as what we see, but it's nice to know that if it does get to those extreme temperatures, or if it does need that additional protection for whatever reason, it's there.
Yeah. Same thing with me as far as the peace of mind goes. Like, I want oils that I know don't use sodium, because then anytime it does crop up, I have a good idea of exactly where it's from. So just avoiding
Yeah,
brands I know that use it, not because it's going to hurt anything, of course, if it is additive, but I want to know exactly the source of it. So that's like one practice I've always taken away from it.
yeah, the clearest picture possible is always best.
So just to wrap things up, I wanted to know, what is your ideal writing setup? Because obviously, with you being remote, you get to control everything about, where you're writing reports. Is it music in the background, no music? Are you like a standing desk person? What do you want when you're writing a report?
Oh, that's a great question. I do have a standing desk. I don't use it very often.
Yeah.
I probably should use it more than I do. Um, I'm actually in my basement, and it used to be a finished basement at our old house. Now it's an unfinished basement at our new house. It's bigger, so that's nice, but otherwise it's just a construction zone is what it looks like because there's
Yeah.
nothing done really. Um, but yeah, I have a desk, just normal setup, and I used to do a whole thing where I had a treadmill and a TV so I could walk and type at the same time. That kind of went away just because the electrical was not finished down here, so I haven't had the chance to set that up yet.
But that
But
would be the
otherwise,
ideal scenario, though.
yeah, that's what I would choose. And you'd be surprised how much faster you write reports when you're kind of walking at a brisk pace.
Yeah.
It's it goes by quick.
Where did you get that idea to do the treadmill rig setup?
Well, we had a small gym and we had a TV in there, and I thought, my computer has an HDMI output, the TV has an HDMI input. I could probably get a splitter and,
Yeah.
with the push of a button, have it go from my monitor to the TV screen. And so that's what I did. Amazon, of course, makes that pretty cheap and easy. So, yeah, that worked out really well. And the resolution wasn't the best, but it worked well enough to where I could at least see what I was typing and see the numbers and stuff. And it worked out well. Actually wouldn't mind doing it again and getting that set up because I was getting my 10,000 steps, no problem.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, that's cardio every day. And it's funny because like I run all of the time outside of work, usually to the point where my legs are too tired when I'm at work to even think about it. So, but that
Nice.
is
At
one
least you
way to
get it
do it.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it's important to get it in. That's for sure. I need to be more active in my day to day now. I need to change something up.
Because when you are not working, you do prefer to be like, I know you hunt a lot and I know you like the outdoors in general. So if you're stepping away from the data, where do you prefer to be?
Yeah, that's another good one. I do like to hunt a lot. Hunting season's coming up here quick. September is big elk season. I believe it starts September 6th, so only a few more weekends here. And that's the same time with archery. Elk, bear, deer, they all kind of open up at the same time for archery. The general season doesn't open until October, so archery season really gives me that time to get my mountain legs on and get
Uh,
out there and get some exercise in before the snow hits. So that's what I usually like to do for exercise. But otherwise, I work around the house. We just bought a house with 5 acres, and it's all on
wow.
an alfalfa field. So there's a lot of work to get done, and just for the kids to go out and play, like the alfalfa is so sharp and it's like they're like sticks in the yard.
Oh,
So the whole
wow.
thing is just full of sticks, and for them to go run out there, it's kind of tough. So we had to cut it really low and make it really uh, easy for them to play, safe for them to play, so they can at least enjoy the yard. Otherwise, the alfalfa grows, 3, 4 feet tall, and it becomes really tough to try to clear out at that point.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
plenty.
keeps me busy.
Absolutely. Well, I want to do, I guess this would be a bonus segment. Did you have a chance to find any recent problems you've addressed, either in like a report or any feedback from customers?
Yeah, the most recent one I just dealt with wasn't really necessarily like an engine problem necessarily, sort of, but not really. It was more or less about warranty and record keeping.
Oh,
Uh, the
interesting.
customer the customer was sampling with us for years, and it was a Subaru STI. And as we know, they can have bearing problems. And I don't know for sure if his developed one or not, but the latest report didn't look so good.
Uh-huh.
And so I think he was trying to reach out to Subaru and see if they would, help him with the warranty. And they told him that our reports weren't proof of an oil change.
Huh.
And I tried to check with Brian and Kristen, and they said, well, it really isn't proof of an oil change. We don't know if you actually changed the oil or not. And so I had to give him the bad news that there really wasn't much we could do to help him in that regard, even though I believe I could see that you changed the oil based on the data and everything.
Yeah.
I said, Subaru can only do what they're going to do, and we can only do what we're going to do. I told him, the best thing to do is maybe start taking better records going forward. But I didn't know exactly what that meant, because in my mind, if you do your own maintenance, it usually is sufficient if you have the receipts and the service record of some sort. I
Uh-huh.
thought that was sufficient, but I don't know anymore if that's going to be enough to cut it when it comes to a warranty claim. They may actually want you to have like a dealer record or maybe some kind of service facility keeping a record of it, something that maybe tags onto the VIN, because I think when you go to the dealer,
Mhm.
it shows up when you pull up the VIN, any
Yeah.
service history.
Yeah. I mean, the record keeping and also just having a being able to eliminate as many variables as possible, like when the samples are taken, know exactly how they're taken. And I don't know, it's kind of awkward even when I go to the dealer and I have to take a sample. Whenever I hand them the bottle, they always stare at me kind of funny at first. I'm like, I get it, but I need this, and I think just having some eyes on it and knowing that it was collected properly and having that as well, because there's so many situations where results aren't what people expect and they'll want an
Yeah,
explanation other than a problem. I'm like, well, did you see the sample as it was taken? Are you sure it wasn't taken from like a waste, pan or
right.
something like that? So that too, knowing everything that's gone into the maintenance and also the sampling technique is important as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, they're not used to doing it, so it's an additional step that they're not thinking about, and then it's easy to forget once the oil's already drained. And so to save face, they may try to, just dip it in the bucket or, dip it in whatever they collected it in and
Yeah,
hope that it didn't get contaminated by anything else. But chances are it probably did, especially if you're servicing multiple cars at the same facility. So,
right. And was that the Subaru you were talking about, was the engine type that FA24D with the RTV issue?
no, I think it was the EJ25
Oh, okay. Interesting.
turbo.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, we're still kind of in the process of gathering all of the data to see, like when an FA24 is out of the woods, um,
Yeah,
after break-in and still seeing like, okay, because I think even if they have the problem, silicon might still clear out entirely. And at that point, you're still looking at wear, right? Because the silicon that would be causing the problem would not be washing out.
right. I think it gets blocked. It blocks up some of the passageways and
Yeah.
creates an oil starvation issue. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we're still sorting through that, like you said, and it'd be nice to know like how to identify that problem more easily, because it
Yeah.
just really ends up looking like metal to us, and we're not sure if it's hard use or if it's an oil starvation problem. It's really
Yeah.
hard to tell. But yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on, because
And,
I don't know if it's such a big deal with the newest ones, but definitely some of these older ones that never got the attention they need afterwards. It seems to be an issue.
and as far as the oil starvation goes, as with, I don't know, it seems like this happens with so many problems, but would you assume that that's going to hit the bearings first as far as the first area to really suffer from oil starvation?
Yeah, in my mind, I tend to lean that direction, mainly because the clearances in the bearing area tend to be tighter than most other parts of the engine, besides like the rings or maybe valves or something like that. But as far as like main wearing components go, I think the bearings are the tightest and the most common place for that wear to occur. So I think that's where it usually happens first. And I'm sure it could happen other places too, but like you said, I think that's the main part that is hit first, where we see it first. And I also think that might be why we tend to see it with coolant too. Coolant tends to attack the bearings first. And I think it's maybe for that same reason. It's tighter, tends to take most of the load of the engine from the combustion process. So it makes sense.
So it's not as much always about like the location of the leak, but where those passageways are and how much room it has to work around those components.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, of course, if it's really blocking oil, like if it's supposed to go to let's say something that's supposed to go to a specific cylinder, for example, and is blocking all the oil going to that cylinder, then it might result in extra cylinder area wear, whereas we might be expecting bearing wear, but it's because of the nature of the blockage. It's blocking that oil going directly to those parts that need to be lubricated. So there could be some exceptions, but generally, I think the bearings are where it goes first.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's good you have such a background in the hands-on side as well as the oil analysis side, because it gives me someone to send all my questions to, because I know I'm going to get an experienced answer on the other end.
Yeah, it helps me too, to be honest, because sometimes you look at the numbers and it's hard to make sense of it. But when you start to think about what part of the engine that might be coming from and kind of just look at the data a little bit more closely, it kind of starts to paint a better picture. But without that information, you're just kind of going off whatever knowledge we do have and what we can gather about that engine just through our training and any kind of articles or paperwork we can read. So having that experience really helps.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I guess we have to get back to the data at some point, but thank you so much for joining me. I think a lot of people are going to be interested in learning more about you because you've been writing reports for them all these years, but they might not know the details about you. So it's good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to help anytime. That's for the other analysts and for the customers likewise. So feel free to reach out anytime.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that was episode 98 with Samir. I had a great time chopping it up with him. We're going to have more of these Meet the Analyst segments whenever we can fit them in. With so many reports to write, you can best believe that most of our time is dedicated to processing your samples and producing reports in an efficient manner that gives you the answers you need right away. But we know that you value these episodes. You'd like knowing more about the stone and the people who make it happen, Samir being one of them. And with this being episode 98, we're bearing down on the century mark of Slick Talk episodes, and with that, we have something special in the works for episode 100. But once you're done with this episode, if you haven't already, go ahead and give us a call. Hit up our voicemail at 614-407-6169. We want to hear from you, especially any questions, anything about Blackstone, what we can find in testing, if we've tested, say, samples from a particular engine type before, an oil type you're curious about. Any sort of question you'd like us to answer, go ahead and call our voicemail. Again, that number is 614-407-6169. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. This is Blackstone Joe, signing off.
The Slick Talk podcast is powered by Blackstone Laboratories. If you're ready to start your oil analysis journey, visit blackstone-labs.com to order your free test kit.